Chapter 1. How Not to Pray. A few years ago, when I happened to be in San Diego for a conference, I unexpectedly ran into an old friend of mine, George Mladen. George is a pianist and a master teacher. He used to host a televised teaching program for the piano called the See and Hear Piano Series. Seeing George again presented me with a golden opportunity. So after one of the plenary sessions of the conference, I grabbed George and said, "Let's go find a piano." So we looked through the church until we found a choir rehearsal room, and we went in there and closed the door. I said to George, "Teach me some things about the piano, because I love to play the piano and learn new little things." So George, the master teacher, sat down at the piano and showed me a couple of little techniques that he uses in his repertoire. I thought about that afterward, about how eager I was to get George aside so that he could teach me to do something I didn't know how to do. I will go out of my way to ask a person to teach me something if I have great admiration for his ability or prowess in a particular skill or art, particularly if it's something I'm interested in. There was a point during the earthly ministry of Jesus when his disciples had the opportunity to do the same thing I did with my friend George. They had the opportunity to ask the master teacher to teach them something. Of course, Jesus had been teaching them on a daily basis for some time already. Each of them had enrolled in his school, becoming a mathetes, a learner or student. They enrolled when Jesus said to them, "Follow me." When he said that, he meant it literally. His school wasn't housed in a building, and it didn't feature a regular schedule of classes. Jesus was a rabbi who had a peripatetic ministry. That is, he moved about from village to village, and his disciples went with him, forming an entourage of sorts. When Jesus called the disciples, he wasn't just saying, "Follow my teachings." He literally wanted them to follow him. So these men gathered about Jesus and walked behind him, trying to memorize the teaching he gave them as they walked along the roads. Obviously, they got more than they bargained for. Not only did they learn the great truths of the Scriptures by following after Jesus, they also were given the unspeakable privilege of being eyewitnesses of the multitude of miracles that Jesus performed. Imagine what it must have been like to have the privilege of following Jesus around day after day, listening to his teaching and watching him perform his miracles. I can think of lots of things they could have asked him to teach them. The disciples might have gone to him and said, "Jesus, teach us how to turn the water into wine." They might have asked, "Teach us how to walk on the water." Or they might have said, "Teach us how to raise people from the dead." Those are the kinds of questions I would have asked him. But the New Testament tells us of a different request that the disciples brought to Jesus. They came to him on one occasion, as Luke records it for us in his gospel, and said, "Lord, teach us to pray." Luke chapter 11, verse 1b. I find it fascinating that this was the burning question they brought to Jesus. They wanted to gain a special insight into prayer as a skill or an art. The Master's prayer life. Why did they ask him this question? My guess is that they saw the link between Jesus' extraordinary prayer life and his power, his teaching, his character, his whole person. They must have noticed that after ministering to large crowds of people, Jesus often would withdraw by himself. He must have felt drained from that ministry.